Hey guys, today I'm going to talk about the making of Frostbite. I had wanted to make a short Western horror film for a long time. I grew up on ranches in Wyoming and Montana, and Western frontier cowboy culture stuff is all really important to me. The latex creature mask that I made for it was the first mask that I'd ever made, at least the first latex mask that I'd ever made. And I made it with the intention of using it for this film down the line. The original idea is quite a bit different from the way that the film ultimately ended up. I'd written a script and storyboarded out this idea that involved a fur trapper who's desperately trying to destroy the body of his dead fur trapping partner. And the corpse is all wrapped up in a blanket, and this guy's, trying to get rid of it, and then the corpse comes back to life, and it turns into this sort of zombie chase sequence thing. The plan was to go home and visit my parents for Christmas, and then shoot this with my dad on some weekend when we had a little bit of time, and to just not really spend anything on it, as little as possible, use stuff that we had at our disposal. So my dad has all of this Mountain Man wardrobe that is stuff that he actually made. He trapped it, skinned it, tanned it. It's all stuff that's based on 1820s, 1830s mountain men and the kind of clothes that they would have worn. The rifle is a Winchester model 1873. I think this particular gun was actually, it came off the line in the 1880s, but that meant that I could comfortably set the film in the 1890s and everything would be pretty period accurate. I shipped the mask home to Montana, and I put all my camera and microphone and stuff in my carry-on luggage, and I flew home. And unfortunately, we ran into some scheduling conflicts, and I ended up losing my other actor who was going to play the corpse. And so we suddenly weren't able to shoot, at least not the way that we'd planned. So on the day that we were supposed to be shooting, we were just kind of sitting around and talking, and my dad said something like, "Wouldn't it be cool if in one of your shorts there was something that came up out of the snow?" And then I got thinking, well, maybe we should just take all the stuff that we'd set aside for this other film and just go out and start making something up. And that's what we did. We just got everything together. We went out and caught the horse. We got the wardrobe and the props. As we were going, I was coming up with this new idea about an 1800s monster hunter who comes across this creature that can travel under the snow.
Go ahead, you can come right by me. The closer you are, the better, without running me over.
This is not the way that I generally like to work. I like to have things planned out as much as possible. I like to storyboard things, but that's not at all what this production was like. It was absolutely fly by the seat of your pants filmmaking. I didn't have a design for the creature because it was supposed to be just a body wrapped in a blanket. So I had my dad go out and stand in the snow and just draped the blanket over top of him. And my hope was that once it was cut together and everything was in context, that it would look kind of creepy and unsettling. We worked in this explosion. There was going to be an explosion in the original idea. We had some tannerite, which is what we used for the explosion. I don't recommend anybody use it for movie special effects. We did it very safely, but just don't do it.
Huh.
I actually came up with an idea after we were done filming. I had gone to stay with my sister who lives a couple hours away, and she was going to take me to the airport so I could fly home to LA. And I had this thought where I was like, man, it would be super cool if when he looked down and he hears the thing crawling underneath his horse, if he looked down and there was two eyes just looking back up at him through the snow. But of course I hadn't shot anything for that. And at that point I'd already sent the mask back to Los Angeles. I had my camera in my carry-on bag, so I took it out and just started filming the snowbank outside my sister's house. And I took some stills and I dug a little hole in the snow where I thought the eyes could eventually go. And then when I got back to LA, I took a still from the footage that we'd shot with the mask, and in Photoshop I comped the eyes into the hole in the snowbank. And so what you're actually seeing in the film is just a still image, and I put some post-camera movement on it, and the creature's eyes also blink, or they open, which is something that I did in After Effects. Once I started cutting everything together, it became pretty apparent that the creature wasn't working like I thought it would. Unfortunately, it just looked like somebody's dad standing out in a field with a blanket draped over his head. And I got fairly disheartened. I didn't know how to fix it. And I was actually considering waiting an entire year and coming back the following Christmas to reshoot the monster shots with a different costume. But then I started talking to a filmmaking friend of mine named Mike Venata, and he thought that I should perhaps make the whole thing day for night. Day for night, for anyone who doesn't know, is the process of shooting your scene in the daylight, and you expose your shots and then color grade later on to make everything look like nighttime. Anyway, I kind of was resistant to it, but Mike was pretty convinced that we could pull it off effectively, and he did some little mock-up color tests on some stills from my footage, and they actually looked really cool. But eventually I decided that that wasn't the direction that I wanted to go, and not because it didn't look good, but because I felt like there was still something fundamentally wrong with the film, and that was that I didn't find the creature to be creepy. And so I went back to square one to try to figure out how I could somehow redesign the creature. The first thing I tried was making this sort of werewolf creature in Photoshop. And it was starting to look okay until I tried to actually animate it, and then it was really just, it didn't look organic and it looked 2D, and it became pretty obvious that it wasn't going to work. So I went back to square one to see if there was anything I could do to manipulate the original footage that I had shot. And then I came up with the idea of the long legs. I created the legs in Photoshop, and then I composited that into the footage of my dad standing under the blanket. Basically, I rotoed around the blanket portion and cropped out his legs, and then, stuck the long legs underneath it and raised it all higher in the frame so it was the appropriate height and whatnot. And then I had the idea to have this big bird just sitting on his head, and I just made this little digital puppet in Photoshop. It's just different layers, and I brought those all into After Effects and keyframe animated them around until they looked pretty convincing. The shot of the bird flying away is actually frame by frame animation. It's essentially cartoon animation of the bird flying. There's a couple other little digital things in the film. There was one shot where there was a jet trail going through the sky in the background, and I had to paint that out. It was pretty easy because there were no clouds in the sky, so it was just a matter of cloning some of the blue sky over top of it. Sound was a huge component in creating the creature because so much of its presence is communicated by sound alone. Ever since I was a kid, I had heard elk bugling, and I thought that the sound was really beautiful but haunting, and it felt like this was a good place to try to use it. But I didn't want it to just sound like an elk, so I reversed the sound and stretched it out and then combined it with the sound of a man screaming. To make it sound like it was traveling under the ground, that was a simple low-pass filter that I applied to the sounds. A low-pass filter basically takes all the high frequencies out of your sound effect. So it gives you kind of the same effect as when, your neighbors are playing music too loud and you just can kind of hear the thumping bass. This was a difficult production because nothing was planned and everything was made up on the spot. And I didn't end up with that much footage to use, and a lot of stuff had to be changed in post to get it to where it eventually ended up. And there were lots of moments along the way when I felt pretty discouraged and I felt like the film was just bad. But the thing that I learned from this was to trust in my own ability to creatively solve problems and to work through things and to be persistent. It's comforting to know that being a good director isn't about knowing all the answers all the time. Personally, I feel like being a good director has a lot more to do with being able to creatively find the right answers and to do that collaboratively. So you're using the people around you, the skills and assets of your crew and your cast to help you find those right answers for your story and for your vision. Anyway, thanks for watching, guys. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope that it inspires you to go out and make something of your own. Anything. It doesn't have to be expensive. It doesn't have to be big. If you're just starting out, it shouldn't be. Just think of a unique idea. Think of something that's interesting, that catches your attention, and go out and make a film about it. There's a lot of people who want to be filmmakers that I think are held back because the idea of becoming a filmmaker is so daunting. But it's important to remember that being a filmmaker is not defined by having a show on Netflix or having made a feature or having a 3-picture deal at Fox or whatever. You become a filmmaker when you start making films. So I feel like the single most important piece of advice that any young filmmaker can get is to go and just start making stuff. So until I see you next time, go out and shoot something, and I'll talk to you soon.
Yeah. Okay, ready? And action. Okay. That ought to work.